I'd like to invite you now to join Halcyon and me in a responsive reading. I'll read one part, and I invite you to read along with her the second part, and the words will be printed at the bottom of your screen. Once more, the fields have ripened to harvest, and the fruitful earth has fulfilled the promise of spring.
The work of those who have labored has been rewarded. They have sown and reaped, planted and gathered.
How rich and beautiful is the bounty gathered, the golden grain and clustered corn, the grapes of purple and green.
The crimson apple, the yellow pears, and all the colors of orchard and garden, vineyard and field.
Season follows after season. After winter, the spring. After summer, the harvest-laden autumn.
From bud to blossom, from flower to fruit, from seed to bud again, the beauty of the earth unfolds.
From harvest of the soil, we are given occasion to garner a harvest of the heart and mind.
A harvest to resolve to be careful stewards of all life's gifts and opportunities.
A harvest of reverence for the wondrous power and life at work in things that grow and in the soul.
A harvest of gratitude for every good for which we enjoy, and a fellowship for all who are sustained by earth's beauty.
May nothing evil cross this door, and may their fortune never pry. Above these windows may the roar and rain go by. Our faith made strong, the rafters will withstand the battering of the storm. This heart through all the world may grow, will keep you warm. Peace shall walk softly through these rooms, as all your friends hold and run, till every strive to keep their fills, and to our shrine. With laughter drown the raucous shouts, and though these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep it out and hold love in. That was good.
Once upon a time, in a desert land by a faraway sea, there was a teacher named Yeshua. He was an ordinary man of ordinary beginnings, born of a carpenter and a teenage mother, but somehow, against all odds, he became well known for his teaching. Maybe it was because as he reached adulthood, he decided that rather than seeking fortune, he would seek wisdom. Nobody really knows what he did during the years between his teens and that period of life we now call the end of his early adulthood. He was 33 years old, which was pretty old 2,000 years ago, and some believe he'd spent 15 to 20 years traveling the world, learning from great teachers like Buddhist Rinpoches and Hindu yogis. Yeshua had been teaching for a while and was developing quite a following. His students, he called them his disciples, had been out on their own teaching others what he had taught them. and people would flock to hear his insights. Now, he wasn't a didactic teacher. He didn't lecture. He was known as a great researcher. He was a storyteller. He was so good at telling stories in the vernacular of his time and place that he could make a clear point with very few words. Yeshua was so in tune with what was going on in his little corner of the world that he could use the images and symbols of that time and place to tell the kind of story that would bring the world to life for the simple folk who would hear him. People who, for the most part, never traveled further than they could walk in one day. His stories, though very short, dripped with metaphor and meaning, conveyed in the wisdom of ages. One spring, Yeshua and his students gathered after being apart for a while. He had been telling stories for days as the crowd of listeners grew bigger and bigger, and he was tired. After a while, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's get away from here. Let's get in a boat and go across the water to the desert so we can rest away from this crowd." So in the morning, they all headed across the water, leaving as quietly as they could. Well, somehow word got out where they were. So by the time they ever reached land on the other side, a crowd of people had already gathered. It was almost 2,000 years before the Beatles, but it was kind of like when John, Paul, George, and Ringo appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. Everyone was screaming and grabbing, dying to get near this guy who would become a superstar virtually overnight. This was still kind of a new thing for Yeshua, this phenomenon of being swarmed by mobs of fans. So he got caught up in the frenzy, forgot about his intention to rest, and sat down to teach. After a few hours in the hot sun, he was hungry, and he could tell by the restlessness in the crowd that they were hungry too. One of his students, Andrew, said, "Yeshua, why don't you send people away so they can eat? They can go out to the villages or knock on the doors of houses nearby and ask to buy food from them." Now, times were different back then. People didn't walk around the streets eating, going from a burger joint to an ice cream shop as they went about their business. There were no popcorn or pizza vendors in the desert. People carried food with them when they traveled. And the most common foods of the day for traveling were dried fish and loaves of hard, dry bread made of barley. These were items that wouldn't spoil or get crushed. But Yeshua had another idea. He turned to a different student, Philip, and said, "Let's feed everyone ourselves. Where can we get some bread?" Philip suppressed a laugh. "Even if we had enough money to buy food for everyone," he said, "there probably isn't enough bread to buy. It's late in the day and there have to be 5,000 people here." It didn't matter because Yeshua already knew what to do. He knew that a lot of people hadn't brought anything with them. In their rush to meet him on the shore where he and his students landed, they had forgotten to bring anything. But he also knew that a lot of people had brought food, more than they needed, even if they weren't willing to share it. So he turned to all of his students and instructed them to go into the crowd and gather all of the food that people would share. Now, these students, they were newbies. They were terrible at asking for what they needed. They had just proved that in the preceding weeks, going out into the villages in pairs. So when they asked, some people gave them food and drink and beds for a night or two, but most people, nearly everyone when they were traveling, turned them away. So this was their experience that they went into the crowd with. And after scouring the crowd, asking for food and drink, they returned with what only one boy was willing to give them: 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish. Yeshua had the students sit everyone in groups of 50 to 100, which they were willing to do, as they watched Yeshua break all of the bread and all of the fishes into pieces and put them into baskets. And the people were curious. When Yeshua was done and everyone was seated, he started passing out the baskets. And the gathered were very, very slow at passing the baskets of food. But after a while, everyone had eaten. In fact, they were stuffed. As he watched, Yeshua became curious, so he asked everyone present to pass the baskets to collect all the remaining food. A frenzy started again in the crowd. Everyone grew giddy with excitement as they watched the baskets pass again, this time getting fuller and fuller as they moved from hand to hand past everyone. "This is indeed a prophet among us. He is meant to be our leader," people shouted. And Yeshua smiled. He knew the crowd wanted more from him. They wanted to carry him off and prevent him from continuing his work. But he had more to do. So he and his disciples quickly got into their boat and headed back to where they came from. The mass of people on the shore, crying and waving goodbye. I love the Bible story of feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Typical of the parables told by the man who would come to be known in the United States as Jesus of Nazareth, it's a little short on facts and details. Left out of the story is all the background information you would need for it to make sense to us now in the way that it made sense to the audience of its time. As I told it, I added that background information, which we know from the work of historians. The story is one of the few that is told 4 times in the Christian Bible, the book that is often called the New Testament. All 4 Gospels tell the same story, with the same basic structure and facts. The men were in a desert. They needed rest, but a crowd showed up. Jesus had compassion for them, and they fed a lot of people from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, if we all witnessed the same thing happening, each of us would tell the story a little differently, focusing on different facts based on our own experiences, our own vantage points, and even our own preconceived notions. And none of those gospel writers were present. They were writing down stories that had been repeated verbally over decades. Matthew tells the basics of the story and gives us no other facts. Luke tells us the people numbered 5,000 and that Jesus suggested buying food for everyone. Mark lets us know that would be impossible, naming an incredibly small amount of money and describing dividing people into groups of 50 to 100. John gives us the most information, though. Philip and Andrew were the disciples who helped Jesus assess the situation and plan the meal. There was a boy willing to share his bread and fish, and the people were so amazed, they declared Jesus their king. So, why is this story so important that all 4 Gospels tell it, you might ask? Well, it's important because it sets the tone for the meteoric rise of Jesus and the suddenness of his acceptance among the Jews in a land occupied by the Romans. Jesus is portrayed as understanding the people and their culture, their yearning to be free from Rome's domination. He spoke their language, and he told them stories about their culture, taking the old tales from the Hebrew Bible and expanding on them and breathing new life into them. He recognized that they had reached the major goal of the Bible, to be unified as one people with one identity. And he gave them a new purpose, to rise above the letter of the law and really care for one another and care for all of humanity. Jesus could get people to do things they didn't want to do, like share their food. Mark and John both hinted to that in their stories of the feeding of the multitude. Pearl Buck, I think, tells the story best. Her book, The Story Bible, which was published in 1971, is full of amalgams. She did what most people do when they read the Bible. She cross-referenced and made one more complete story out of the bits and pieces available in each gospel. I mean, her methodology has its problems, that's for sure, but hey, it's what folks have done with the Bible ever since it was codified. What I find funny is that, despite the importance of the story, Thomas Jefferson, a Unitarian, left it out of his book, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, the book that would come to be known as the Jefferson Bible. He didn't like miracles. I picture him sitting on the floor of his office at the dawn of the 19th century, cutting his Bible into pieces with the lion's share of it left in the trash. His is a very slim volume. But nowhere in the text of any of the four Gospels, in any translation that I've read, is the word miracle used. Buck tells the story well, but one of the explanations, I think, one of the best explanations, appears in the 2004 film Millions, written by Frank Boyce and directed by Danny Boyle. A little boy, Damien, is obsessed with saints, convinced his mother is among them. She's just died, and people keep referring to her as poor sainted Maureen. And in the movie, Damien is visited by saints. You're never quite sure if they're real or they're in his imagination, but they teach him. And one night, St. Francis appears and explains the miracle of the fishes and loaves. He said that most people had food with them, and they wouldn't have shared with those who had none, but Jesus got them to. When the baskets came to them, they would break up their bread and fish, keep what they needed, and give the rest away. And that was the miracle, that Jesus got strangers to share with each other. And the people of the time understood that when Jesus told the story. That's why they wanted him to be their leader. A lot of Boyce's information came from biblical scholars like Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan, members of the Jesus Seminar, which over the last 30 years has used the tools of cultural anthropology and archaeology, as well as primary and secondary sources of historical evidence, to better understand the historical Jesus, known in his time, in his native language, as Yeshua. The Jesus Seminar set out to ask all the questions that any decent researcher or investigator would ask, questions often overlooked by those of blind faith. Questions like, who was he? Where did he come from and where did he go? What did he do and what did he say? What were people saying about him at the time? How were his words and actions recorded at the time, and how were the stories told after his death? What about other gospels that never made it into the accepted canon? And what do we know about how people lived in that time. You know, that little English Christmas movie from 15 years ago explained the story of the fishes and loaves. And I don't think it's odd to lift it up as an appropriate text for making a point. Jesus used the tales of popular culture of his time to form a new narrative. And the people who told his story afterward did exactly the same thing. And you know, we have a history here at East Shore of making movie lore part of the story of who we are. If you've been here a little while, you know what I mean. If we build it, they will come. Now, that saying is based on a line repeated frequently in the 1989 film Field of Dreams, written and directed by Phil Robinson, based on a story by W.P. Kinsella. The character of Ray, played by Kevin Costner, hears a voice in his cornfield. Over the course of a few months, the voice tells him three things. If you build it, he will come. Ease his pain, and go the distance. First, the field says, if you build it, he will come. Ray doesn't know what it means at first, but he figures out and does what the voice says. He plows under part of his cornfield, jeopardizing his family's financial well-being, and builds a baseball park, complete with lights and a little set of bleachers. Now everyone thinks he's nuts. But once the ball field is complete, his wife and daughter can see what he sees. Shoeless Joe Jackson, a player disgraced in 1919 for his involvement in a conspiracy to fix the World Series, appears out of the surrounding corn. Then, on subsequent nights, he brings more players. Poor Ray really enjoys seeing these guys, seemingly back from the dead, playing baseball in his field, but he doesn't know what he's supposed to do next. He's in danger of losing his farm, and the field tells him, ease his pain. He thinks that missive has something to do with an old hippie literary hero, Terrence Mann, who he seeks out and convinces to join the search. Mann is reluctant, but he returns to the field with Ray. Like the rest of the family, Terrence Mann sees the ball players coming into the field and playing, but still, nobody outside of their little core group sees what's happening, and they're still confused. They don't really know what to do next. Go the distance, the field says to them. So Ray does. They do. They wait. Ray's father shows up as a young man, as well as another whose dream of playing in the big leagues ended decades earlier. It's a menagerie of characters from different periods of time reliving their dreams together. I don't want to give away the entire story, but something miraculous, something magical happens. And suddenly, the biggest doubter of all, Ray's brother-in-law, can see what's happening. He can see the ball players in the field, and he has a change of heart. He sees what the field is about. That which seemed crazy is suddenly real. And it's healing to him. Ray's daughter looks at all the grown-ups and says, they will come. And they do. Crowds of people start coming from all over the world to experience healing, to have their pain eased. Ray has gone the distance. There's the miracle in the story. You'd think at first glance the miracle is the arrival of the ghosts of men who have been dead for decades, but the miracle is the change of heart experienced by so many. A change that they can't explain. All they know is that they need it. They need to be there. And their hearts are changed. That's the miracle. You know, over the last 7 years, a lot of East Shore members who were around have told me that this facility was built 23 years ago with an attitude that if we build it, they will come. The sanctuary, the parking lot, and the grounds are so much larger than we've ever needed as a congregation because the people who put the most resources into their construction were sure of one thing: an inclusive message with the power to transform lives. They thought it was a message that would draw in more and more people over time, and they wanted to make room for that. It was an incredibly generous gesture. Sadly, the building was built, and they have not come in droves seeking to have their pain eased or to witness a miracle. There's been no miracle. East Shore is smaller now than it was then, not larger. Now, I don't want to sound like I think there's been some kind of failure in the system for which someone must be blamed. There's nothing to blame. Congregations of all denominations are shrinking. Even the non-denominational evangelical churches that saw such growth for a couple of decades, they don't talk about it, but they're shrinking. The Methodists are diminishing as they split up. The Roman Catholic Church in the United States is withering. The Episcopalians project that their membership in 5 to 10 years will be half what it is now. And they're one of the largest denominations in the country. And the vast majority of all Protestant congregations are served by volunteer ministers who have full-time jobs not related to their calling. For them, it's a calling from God to serve His people in His name. And our theology isn't like that. We don't see ministers as serving God. We see ministers as working for their congregations. So East Shore is on the cusp of something new. Not just because we're starting to figure out how to reopen because of COVID, and everything will look different from now on. East Shore is on the cusp of something new, not just because of the political divide in our nation, not just because of the shifting demographics of Northeast Ohio, and not just because of Unitarian Universalism's new laser focus on racial justice. East Shore is on the cusp of something new because I'm leaving, and you will likely not be served by a minister for a while. You'll be doing this work on your own. And my leaving isn't the big thing here. Plenty of ministers have left before, and my leaving will be no different. You'll survive that. The big thing is that you'll be having to do a lot of the work yourself. You know, from the time I arrived, I've had goals set by the Board of Trustees and the Committee on Ministry. They've all been goals geared toward becoming healthier, more trusting of each other, more generous, more cohesive, with a stronger sense of a shared mission and a clearer vision for the future. We've had some successes together, like beverages and banter, first Wednesday nights. And we've had a few things that didn't go quite as planned, like generational conversations and the rollout of a new organizational structure, which was thwarted by the pandemic. Like every human relationship, ours has been imperfect. I've made mistakes. But ultimately, it's been good work we've done together. I've learned. I've taught. You've learned. You've taught. And we've all become more understanding and more resilient in the process. I know you were all expecting and maybe even hoping for a new minister. Someone new to accompany you and guide you on this journey of constantly creating a place you can love and feel good about. A minister at this point doesn't seem likely, though it's still possible. And I know you may be, you might be freaking out a little bit. As Pollyanna as it might sound, I want you to think about this not as a failure of some sort, as a lack of something, but as an opportunity to try something new. Let's face it, East Shore and other congregations reopen after more than a year. We have no idea what it will look like. Some people we've known for years will have acquired other Sunday morning routines. Some will prefer to stay home in their pajamas and watch the service online on Sunday or Tuesday. Some will return with newfound zeal and energy and commitment. And some new folks may even show up, having realized in the deprivation of the pandemic that they need community, feeling that UU is the right fit for them. This may just be an if you build it, they will come kind of moment. But it won't happen overnight, and it won't happen without work. People won't just show up because this is a beautiful building and they've heard of Unitarian Universalism. You've built this place. You've built the building. You built the community. You've built this kind of extended family. You have this building nestled in the site, bathed in the light of this beacon, waiting to be refilled. But who will come? You're going to have to imagine not faceless throngs of people, but individuals with their own personalities and their own needs. You'll have to imagine what they're seeking. And when they come, you'll have to ask them what they're seeking. Are they seeking joy, connection, safe space to grieve, a community of radical accountability, a place of progressive activism where aggression is never tolerated in speech or action, a group committed to racial justice and dismantling oppression? Be prepared to meet their needs and to ease their pain from the loss of loved ones or separation from their families because of politics or religion. Be prepared to ease their pain from sadness, from loneliness, from ill health, or whatever else grieves them. Easing the pain of dozens or even hundreds of individuals may mean addressing a huge, huge diversity of needs. Be prepared to go the distance. And if they don't show up, go out and meet them where they are. Talk to your friends. Get involved in your community, not just the community where you live, but the community of this church, the city of Kirtland. Involve yourselves with other congregations. Show up for Kirtland City Council meetings. Ask what the people of this place need and offer a solution, or at least a place to come up with a solution together. And this is the most important part, maybe the hardest part. Talk to your friends about what it is that you find here that nurtures your soul. Talk to them now. Engage in the evangelism of the living. Don't wait until your memorial service for your friends to find out that all these years you've been part of a church that they would have loved. I really believe that the miracle of the loaves and fishes wasn't that food was magically created from nothing. The miracle was that hearts and minds were changed. People who were predisposed to not share, shared. They opened themselves up to a new way of thinking, one that was more attentive to the needs and pain of others. Just like Ray and his family and friends in the Field of Dreams. And that, my friends, is what it's going to take to survive and thrive in the changing world. You've built it. Now, see your neighbors. Meet them. Invite them in. Listen to their pain. Help them ease their pain. And go the distance. And watch yourselves and each other be transformed as you accomplish your dreams. You can do it. I know you can. Together. With a little compassion and attention. You can do it. Together. A miracle has already happened right here at East Shore. No virgin gave birth, no sea was parted, the weeds didn't even pull themselves out from around the shrubs. The pledge drive reached its goal for the coming year. And more amazing than that, the pledges made last year for this year that is coming to a close are on track and fulfilled at a rate pretty darn close to 100%. Now, don't get me wrong. For as long as I've known you, you've been a generous lot. You give what you can. You up your pledge when there's need. You give to the capital campaign. And you make good on your promises. But in a pandemic, it's been absolutely remarkable how well you've done in caring for your church home and family. So thank you. Thank yourselves. Thank each other. You did it together, as I know you will continue to do. I'd like to close now with a benediction, a speaking of good words by Robert Mabry Doss, which appears in our gray hymnal, and honestly, it's one of my favorites. For all who see God, may God go with you. For all who embrace life, may life return your affection. For all who seek a right path, may a way be found, and the courage to take it step by step. Okay.
The recording has started, so whenever you're ready.
We join hands.
In Unitarian Universalist Fellowship,
Pledging ourselves
to an individual religious freedom
that transcends all creeds,
Not to think alike.
but to journey together.
I love it when it works.